Welcome back to Reddit Tales by Uncle Sammy. I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribed and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth, let's get into it. When somebody starts talking confidently about property, money, or our future, pay attention to the details they get wrong. In this story, the loudest red flag was not lipstick on a collar or a late-night text. It was my wife saying in court, the 6 vacation homes in Canada, when the 6 cottages at the center of everything had never been in Canada a day in their lives. Sometimes a mistake that exposes betrayal is small enough to fit inside a single sentence. That is why, when the facts of your own life start coming out of someone else's mouth crooked, you stop arguing and start documenting. If you love intense cheating wife revenge stories, courtroom betrayal drama, and relationship stories with shocking twists, hit like, share this with someone who loves story time, and subscribe for more original stories where the truth comes out at the worst possible moment. And while you listen, tell me in the comments, what was the first red flag you caught? The morning my marriage finally broke open in public, my wife looked beautiful and completely unbothered. Simone sat at the long table in Wayne County Circuit Court with her back straight and her pearl earrings catching the fluorescent light. Her new boyfriend, Andre, sat beside her like he had paid for the room. He had that banker calm some men who wear the way other men wear cufflinks. Their lawyer kept whispering to them, and every few seconds Simone would press her lips together to hide a smile. Then she said, clear as a bell, the 6 vacation homes in Canada are marital assets. I felt my pulse slow down. Canada, that was their first mistake. I did not correct her. I did not even look at her. I kept my hand on the thin manila envelope inside my jacket and let the mistake breathe in the room. The 6 properties were 6 weathered rental cottages on Drummond Island, Michigan, land my grandfather bought over 22 years, one cottage at a time after he got off the line at the Dodge plant. You could stand at the dock and look across the water toward Canada. Yes, that did not make them Canadian. Simone had vacationed there twice with me. Andre had never been. That one sentence told me what I had already come to understand. They had been planning around my life without ever really knowing it. 6 months earlier, I was still doing what decent people do when something feels wrong in their house. I was explaining it away. I told myself Simone was tired because the museum had her running donor dinners every other week. I told myself the new silk blouses and later nights were part of promotion. I told myself the way she started answering me with one-word replies had something to do with stress and not contempt. In February, Detroit was all gray slush and bus brakes sighing along Woodward. I would come home from the inspection office with my boots wet and my shoulders aching, and the house would already feel like someplace I needed permission to enter. Simone had habits. I knew the way a man knows the sound of his own kitchen. When she was happy, she hummed while she sorted mail. When she was irritated, she straightened picture frames that were already straight. When she was lying, she stirred tea long after the sugar had dissolved. Around the middle of February, every mug in our sink had a spoon clinking against the side. She started leaving her phone face down. And when messages came through, she flipped it over so fast the movement was almost graceful. Once, while I was taking my coat off, I said, "Are you busy tonight?" She did not even look up. She kept stirring an empty cup and said, "Aren't we all?" The cottages had never interested her much before. That was fine with me. They were my quiet work. I kept their maintenance notes in a red composition book, the kind kids use in school, with little squares where I logged roof patches, water heater issues, guest deposits, and which porch screens needed replacing after summer storms. Each brass key ring had a fish stamped into it, because my grandfather loved Lake Huron and hated plain hardware. Every spring, I rubbed the brass with oil and laid the keys out on the dining table by size. I had names for the cottages that never made the online listings: June Bird, Harbor Blue, Sunday Rest. Simone used to tease me about that. Then she started asking questions. It began with practical-sounding questions, the kind that do not feel dangerous until you hear them too late in your own memory. "Are the cottages all under one trust?" she asked one Sunday after church, while pulling the bobby pins from her hair. "Would it be simpler if they were in an LLC?" Another night, she asked whether the island properties had been reappraised recently. I remember looking up from trimming green beans and answering without suspicion, because that is what marriage teaches you to do. You assume curiosity is curiosity. You assume your wife is talking to you because she wants to understand your life, not because she is measuring where to slide a knife. The first decision I made that could have changed everything came at my niece's college send-off dinner in Southfield. My sister had rented a room behind a soul food restaurant, and the whole family was passing around peach cobbler and taking blurry pictures under a banner with crooked gold letters. Simone's phone lit up on the table while she was at the restroom. The preview only showed a name, Andre, and the words, "I can walk him to the transfer." I had enough right there to start a scene if I wanted one. Instead, I locked her screen and slid the phone back where it had been. I chose my niece's night over my own suspicion. I still believe that was the right call, even though it bought Simone more time. After that dinner, the coldness in our house sharpened. Simone stopped asking whether I had eaten. She stopped touching my shoulder in passing. The woman who used to call from the grocery store to ask whether we needed onions or paper towels now treated me like an assistant she was trying not to depend on. She came in later and later. The smell of her perfume covered by something woody I knew did not belong to either of us. One night, close to 1 in the morning, I heard her in the foyer whisper laughing into her phone. When I turned on the hall light, she did not flinch. She only blinked once and said, "You do not have to monitor me." That word stung. Monitor, as a concern or control. I cut my hair every other Saturday at a barbershop in Livernois where the men argued about basketball, property taxes, and who made the best turkey chops in the city. My barber, Reggie, knew me well enough to notice when I stopped talking. He clicked his clippers off, draped a warm towel over my forehead, and said, "Whatever it is, do not let embarrassment make your decisions for you." I asked him what that meant. He said, "Men get cheated, lied to, cleaned out, and half the damage comes from trying to save face too early." I laughed like I did not need that advice. Then I tipped him $10 extra and sat in my truck for 15 minutes before driving home. Andre entered my life in an ugly little sideways manner. Simone brought him up first as a donor contact from the museum gala. "He knows cross-border state strategy," she said while rinsing strawberries at the sink. "Smart guy. Very polished." A week later, his name appeared on a printed packet she left beside our printer, a proposal with terms like asset consolidation and tax efficiency highlighted in yellow. I stood there in the home office reading those pages while the furnace kicked on under my feet. His firm wanted to streamline legacy holdings with binational visibility. It sounded slick and expensive and entirely too interested in property my wife had never cared to understand until a man in a tailored suit made it sound glamorous. I wish I could say I knew immediately what to do. I did not. My mother had just started dialysis, and part of me was so tired I did not trust my own judgment. Shame is a quiet voice. It tells you not to make a fool of yourself. It tells you maybe you are jealous because you are aging, because your wife is ambitious, because another man sounds more current than you do. I listened to that voice longer than I should have. I told myself if I became suspicious without proof, I would be the one poisoning the house. So I stayed polite. I asked about her day. I folded towels. I lived inside denial the way some people live inside debt. The next piece came in the mail, folded into an envelope from our accountant. Simone always sorted the mail first, but that day I got home early because a boiler inspection in Midtown had been canceled. Mixed in with W-2 forms and a church newsletter was a draft asset summary with handwriting I did not recognize. There, under Real Holdings, was a line that read, 6 seasonal homes, Ontario Corridor. I stared at it until the print blurred. Ontario Corridor. That was how Andre saw my grandfather's cottages, as inventory near an international border. My jaw tightened, not because of the money first, but because the family's story had already been stripped out of it. It had been converted into strategy. The second decision I made came that same evening. Simone got home carrying 2 garment bags and a face full of impatience. I could have held that draft summary up and demanded answers. I could have forced a confession, or at least a lie. Instead, I asked whether she wanted salmon or chicken for dinner. She looked relieved so quickly it almost broke my heart. I made that choice because by then I had begun to understand something ugly. Once people know you are watching, they become careful. I did not want to be careful. I wanted the version of Simone who thought I was still soft, still trusting, still a step behind. That version would keep making records. The next morning, before work, I drove to the credit union branch where my grandfather's trust papers were stored in a safe deposit box. The parking lot was crusted with old snow, and the flag out front snapped hard in the wind. I signed a little card, took the key from my wallet, and sat in that private room under a portrait of somebody's founder nobody remembered. The documents were exactly what I knew them to be. A family land trust established 8 years before I married Simone, amended only once after my mother's house was sold. The cottages were separate property, clean, clear, untouchable, unless someone planned to make them look otherwise. That same week, I got 2 login alerts from our shared cloud drive. I almost ignored them because technology throws warnings the way people clear their throats. But one alert came at 2:13 a.m. from a device not recognized, and another from an IP address I later learned belonged to a hotel downtown. When I checked the file history on a scanned copy of my trust amendment, the access trail included an export I did not make. My stomach dropped in that flat, cold way fear does when it stops being abstract. Somebody had not only been talking about my property, somebody had been inside the documents. Marriage can survive a lot of things. Hidden access is not one of them. I met Andre properly 2 nights later at a donor reception. Simone insisted I attend. It was one of those museum evenings where everybody talks softly over trays of short ribs and tiny desserts that never feel worth a bite. He was handsome in a clean, expensive way. We'll watch that announce itself before he did. Marcus, man, I have heard a lot about your portfolio, he said, pumping my hand too firmly. Portfolio. I almost laughed. He asked about the cottages as if he were already advising us, and when I answered in specifics, well, depth, septic replacements, winter occupancy caps. His eyes glazed for half a second. He did not love the properties. He loved the shape of them on paper. After that night, Simone's questions became more pointed. Could I send her digital copies of the trust? Did I know where my old notarized signature pages were? Had I ever thought about adding her as co-manager for convenience, in case something happened to me? She said everything with that same gentle, practical tone, like she was helping me get organized. I started hearing manipulation in ordinary grammar. At dinner she said we when she meant I. She said future when she meant leverage. I answered vaguely and changed the subject. Then, after she went to bed, I sat in the dark living room listening to the refrigerator hum and admitted out loud to nobody, my wife is lining something up. I call my cousin Camille Brewer because every family has one person who keeps her head when everybody else is performing. Camille was a probate attorney in Southfield, precise in speech and allergic to drama. We met at a diner near 8 Mile, just after sunrise. The waitress called everybody baby, and the coffee tasted like it had been filtered through old pennies. I slid the draft summary and cloud alerts across the booth. Camille did not gasp. She read, tapped the paper twice, and said, "Do not confront her. Pull account histories. Copy every filing. And Marcus, listen to me. If there's a boyfriend involved, he is not the emotional problem. He is the operational problem." That sentence reorganized my brain. Camille brought in Vernon Tolles, a forensic accountant with patient eyes and a tie that always looked 1 hour behind. Vernon spread my account records over his office table and started tracing rental income with a pencil eraser instead of the pencil tip, like he had done it so long the motion was muscle memory. 2 things jumped out fast. First, one cottage's summer deposits had been redirected through a new merchant processor I did not authorize. Second, a consulting fee had been drafted from one of my maintenance accounts 3 times in 3 months. The payee was a shell company Vernon linked to Andre's advisory network. "This is not romance," Vernon said quietly. "This is staging." We recovered deleted emails from a shared backup Simone forgot existed. That was the moment the fog left for good. There were messages between Simone and Andre discussing valuations, title copies, timing, and whether I could be pressured into signing consolidation paperwork before tax season. One message from Andre read, "He associates the cottages with family sentiment. Use management language, not money language. Another, from Simone, said, he trusts me if I sound tired enough. I sat there looking at the screen while a space heater rattled in Vernon's office. And what hurt me most was not that she wanted another man. It was that she had studied my better instincts and turned them into entry points. The first direct evidence I gathered with my own hands came by accident. I came home early from an inspection in Corktown because a client had no access to the building, and as I pulled into my driveway, I saw Andre's black sedan out front. The smartest and dumbest urge in me rose at the same time. I wanted to charge through my own front door and drag truth into the light. Instead, I stayed in the truck. I lowered my breathing, opened the voice recorder on my phone, and walked up quietly through the side yard. Through the cracked kitchen window, I heard Simone say, he still thinks the island houses are just sentimental. Andre laughed and said, then let sentiment pay for our next 10 years. I did not go in. That choice still surprises me when I think about it. I stood in my own yard with wet March wind coming off the alley and listened to another man sit at my kitchen table like he had already moved into my future. I could hear glass touching stone, a chair leg scraping, Simone's low laugh. Every nerve in me wanted the relief of noise. Instead, I kept recording until they stopped talking business and started talking about a trip to New Orleans. Then I walked back to my truck and drove to Belle Isle, where I sat staring at the river until my hands stopped shaking. I chose evidence over pride because pride would not save my property. Over the next 3 weeks, the scheme stopped looking messy and started looking professional. Simone filed for equitable restructuring before she filed for divorce, which is the first time I realized she and Andre believed they could get ahead of facts by sounding sophisticated enough. A draft operating agreement appeared in our home printer Q naming Simone as co-manager of an entity that had never legally existed. There was also a notary stamp from a county office I had not visited in years. Vernon compared the signature to a scanned thank you letter I had signed for our church scholarship fund. They had lifted my name from that page, cleaned it up, and used it in property paperwork. Not a fight, a scheme. Camille explained the play from the legal side. They want you embarrassed and hurried, she said in her office while rain tapped the windows. If you blow up, you look unstable. If you settle out of fatigue, they call it fairness. If you fight without documentation, they paint you as possessive. Their best chance is to make this feel too ugly for you to inspect closely. She pointed to a highlighted line in Andre's email. Push for an adjacent valuation. He will not want cross-border scrutiny. I almost laughed at the arrogance. They were trying to scare me with paperwork they barely understood. But ugly or not, a lie typed in 12-point font can still ruin your life if you do not answer correctly. When Simone finally filed for divorce, the petition read like it had been ghost-ridden by entitlement. She alleged that the 6 vacation homes in Canada-adjacent territory had been actively managed as joint marital assets and should therefore be divided. Canada-adjacent territory. Even then, they could not describe Drummond Island like people who had stood on its dock in October and felt that cold came straight through wool. They asked for half the rental income, half the appreciation, and temporary control over property administration, pending final division. I read those pages at the same dining table where I once laid out the brass fish key rings every spring. My chest hurt, but my mind settled. They were overplaying it. Court prep was not glamorous. It was fluorescent lights, copier heat, legal pads, and Camille telling me to stop circling language the judge would already understand. Vernon created charts showing deposit diversions and access logs. I built a timeline by hand first, then typed it out because I needed the sequence to live in my body. Simone meets Andre at a gala. Simone requests digital trust copies. Unrecognized device login. Draft shell entity. Forged assignment pages. Redirected merchant deposits. Divorce filing. What mattered was not one dramatic betrayal. It was an accumulation. Paper is powerful because it does not get tired of telling the same truth. By the end, we had exhibits. Camille still wanted one more thing. Distill it, she said. Make it impossible to miss. The morning of a hearing, I stopped at Lafayette Coney because hunger does strange things to a man's judgment. I sat at the counter with mustard on my fingers and courthouse papers in a leather folder by my elbow. A construction crew was eating next to me, talking about busted rebar and a foreman who lied about everything except church. The ordinariness of that conversation steadied me. Outside downtown Detroit was all damp wind and traffic hiss. I bought a second coffee for the walk and threw it away after 2 sips because it tasted burnt enough to qualify as punishment. By the time I reached the courthouse steps, I had one thought only. Keep your mouth closed until the record opens. Simone and Andre were already in the hallway when I got there. She wore a cream suit I had never seen before. He wore navy with a pocket square that matched nothing in the building, which somehow made it worse. Their ease was theatrical but convincing. They looked like people who had rehearsed the outcome. Simone glanced at me the way you glance at a contractor who showed up late. Andre gave the smallest nod, half greeting and half warning. I did not return it. I took a seat on the wooden bench, opened my folder, and counted my exhibits once more. My hands were steady, and that unnerved me. Anger is simpler than stillness. Stillness makes room for grief. Their lawyer, Dana Keels, came over 5 minutes before the hearing with a settlement proposal that insulted me so efficiently it almost impressed me. She suggested I retain the marital home in Detroit in exchange for giving up my claim to the 6 cottages and accepting a temporary management arrangement to preserve income continuity. Income continuity. That was how they described removing me from the property stream my family had built over decades. Dana spoke softly, professional as church clothes. My client would prefer to end this cleanly, she said. I looked at the signature line, folded the paper once, and handed it back. Then your client should behave cleanly, I said. It was the first sentence I had spoken to their side all morning. Once we were seated in the courtroom, Simone looked less like my wife and like a role she had studied too hard. Her face was composed, but I saw her left thumb rub the edge of her folder over and over. She did that when she was trying not to rush. When the judge asked Dana to summarize the asset dispute, Dana stood and said, with full confidence, the 6 vacation homes in Canada constitute the principal contested marital holdings. Simone nodded beside her. Andre relaxed deeper into his chair. I felt something close to pity then, brief and sharp. They had built a strategy around property they never respected enough to learn, and confidence without accuracy is just self-destruction dressed up. Judge Rochelle Briggs stopped writing. It was a small movement, but it changed the room. She looked over her glasses at Dana, then at Simone, then down at the petition again. Canada? She asked. Dana started to clarify, but Simone leaned forward before her lawyer could stop her. Yes, Your Honor. The 6 vacation homes near Canada. The properties we have managed together. There it was. The reach, the possession, the public lie. Camille stood and asked permission to submit a supplemental summary page tied to the existing exhibits. Judge Briggs held out her hand. I passed the envelope forward without standing. It felt almost anticlimactic. That much hurt condensed into one thin page. The judge read silently at first. Courtrooms make their own weather, and for about 30 seconds the room held one still temperature. No chairs moved. No papers rustled. I watched Judge Briggs's expression shift from neutrality to concentration to something that looked like disbelief trying not to become amusement. Then she exhaled through her nose, not quite a laugh but close, and said, Well... Dana straightened fast. Simone's shoulders rose half an inch. Andre leaned toward the page without meaning to. I knew what the judge was seeing. 6 premarital trust entries, all in Michigan. Scanned signature irregularities, cloud access logs, diverted funds, and at the bottom one quoted email. He will not know the difference if we say Canada. Dana asked to review the page, and Judge Briggs let her. Watching that woman read the summary was the first truly satisfying moment I had allowed myself. Not because I enjoyed humiliation, but because spin has a very short life when fact patterns line up. Dana's face did not crumble. Good lawyers do not perform. It tightened around the eyes, and that was enough. The page showed the trust date from 8 years before my marriage. It showed a forged manager consent using a signature lifted from unrelated documents. It showed the merchant processor redirection linked to Andre's advisory shell. Most importantly, it showed intent, not confusion, not bookkeeping sloppiness. Intent, repeated and documented. Simone tried to speak before the judge addressed her. "Your Honor, this is being distorted," she said, voice thin and suddenly younger than I had heard it in years. Judge Briggs raised one hand. "Mrs. Ellington, you can answer when I ask you a question." That shut the air off around Simone. She sat back and pressed her lips together. Andre whispered something to Dana. Dana shook her head once without looking at him. I sat there remembering all the nights Simone came home with that tired little mask on, all the careful spoon stirring, all the practical language. It hit me then that even now she was still trying to manage the room emotionally, to steer tone instead of facts. But facts had already arrived. Andre made his move next, which was exactly the kind of mistake a man makes when he thinks presence equals authority. He stood halfway up and said, "With respect, this summary leaves out the joint planning discussions." Judge Briggs did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Sir, unless you are counsel, you will sit down immediately." He froze with one hand on the table edge, then lowered himself into his chair. The confidence went out of him in pieces. First his jaw unclenched, then his shoulders dipped, then his eyes started scanning the room the way men do when they realize no one is coming to rescue their version of events. It was not dramatic. It was precise. Judge Briggs turned back to Dana. "Your client's filing repeatedly misidentifies the location and legal character of these properties. More serious than that, the supplemental exhibits support a claim of attempted asset manipulation through forged authorizations and diverted income." Each word landed with the clean weight of something that had been considered before being spoken. Dana tried to argue that Simone believed the management interest had become marital through practice. "Judge." Briggs looked at the emails again. "Belief does not explain falsified signatures," she said. Then she looked at me for the first time in any real way, as if confirming I was not about to perform either. I kept my hands folded and gave the smallest nod. Let the record do its work. The ruling, at least the first part of it, came fast once the structure collapsed. The 6 cottages remained my separate property pending final divorce proceedings, with temporary injunctive relief barring Simone or any agent of hers from contacting vendors, changing access credentials, collecting rent, or representing themselves as property managers. The diverted funds would be subject to forensic accounting. The suspected document fraud would be referred for further review. I did not smile. I barely breathed. There are moments when survival feels too serious for celebration. Across the aisle, Simone looked stunned not because she had lost the cottages, but because she had lost the assumption that she could narrate me into weakness and have the court join in. When the hearing ended, the courtroom emptied with the same dull sounds every courtroom makes. Chairs scooting, files closing, low voices turning back into hallway voices. Simone reached me before I made it to the door. "Marcus," she said, barely above a whisper. It was the first time in months she had spoken my name without impatience attached to it. Her eyes were bright, not with remorse, but with fear. "Please do not push this any further." She did not say she was sorry. She did not mention love. She did not ask how I was. She asked for containment. Andre stayed behind her, silent now, suddenly interested in the floor. I looked at Simone's hand on my sleeve and gently moved it away. "I am not pushing anything," I said. "I am stopping what you started." That was the truest sentence I had spoken all year. She opened her mouth like there might still be some private version of us to retreat into, some back hall where she could become my wife again for 5 minutes and negotiate on that basis. But the private version had died long before the hearing. It died in increments. In the kitchen, in late-night lies, in paperwork she thought I would sign. Sleepy, in a casual way she let another man learn the entry points to my life. I walked past her then, not triumphant, just clear. Clarity can feel cruel when someone else benefited from your confusion. Outside the courthouse, the air was colder than it had been that morning, and it felt good against my face. I stood on the steps with traffic moving below and called my mother before I called anybody else. She had known enough to worry, but not enough to burden her dialysis days with details. When she answered, I said, "The cottages are safe." She was quiet for a second, then said, "Your granddaddy would have told you to sit down somewhere and eat." I laughed for the first time in weeks. It came out rough, but it was real. After that, I called Camille, then Vernon, then my property manager on the island. Business first, healing second. Both mattered. The practical aftermath began before the emotional one had any chance to catch up. By that evening, I had frozen vendor changes, rotated passwords, shifted all rental receipts into a new account, and replaced the old digital archive with a lock system only my attorney and I could access. I changed the alarm code at the house and every smart lock on the cottages. I also made one appointment I had dodged for years. Therapy. Thursday at 6 in an office near New Center that smelled like books and eucalyptus. I did not want to become one of those men who mistake caution for wisdom and spend the rest of their life punishing honest people for what one dishonest person did. The community reaction came in layers. At church, nobody asked directly, but people looked at me with that careful tenderness black folks reserve for funerals and divorces, as if both are public grief with different paperwork. Reggie at the barbershop clicked his tongue when I told him a line about Canada and said, "That is what happens when people want your blessings without your history." My sister brought over gumbo and did not mention Simone once. A deacon's wife tried to say, "Everything happens for a reason," and I almost left the fellowship hall. Not every wound needs a slogan on top of it. Some things happen because somebody got greedy and mistook patience for permission. The divorce itself took months, because truth in court is not the same thing as closure at home. Simone's lawyer changed tactics. The financial aggression fell away and emotional narrative came in. Loneliness, incompatibility, drift, growing apart. Some of that was true. Marriages do drift. People do fail each other. But drift does not forge signatures. Loneliness does not divert rent through shell companies. I had to learn to hold two truths at once. I had been a husband with flaws, and I had also been deliberately targeted by the person who knew those flaws best. That balancing act was harder than the hearing. Anger is simple. Accurate grief requires more discipline than most people realize. In June, after the roads cleared and the ferry schedule settled into summer, I went back to Drummond Island alone. The cottages smelled like pine cleaner, damp wood, and the faint metallic note lake houses always have before you open them up for the season. I walked each porch with my red composition book and a screwdriver in my back pocket. Harbor Blue needed a railing tightened. June Bird had a window that stuck. At Sunday rest, I stood with the brass key in my palm and looked over the water toward the Canadian shore, visible but far. I said out loud, "Still Michigan." It sounded foolish and holy at the same time. The place did not answer. It did not need to. I sleep better now, though not perfectly. Some mornings I still wake before dawn and hear a spoon tapping a mug in my memory. Some evenings I stand at my kitchen counter and feel the ghost of the house I thought I had. But I no longer confuse silence with weakness, and I no longer hand trust to anyone just because we have history. The 6 cottages are still mine, not because I outshouted anybody, but because I finally respected my own reality enough to defend it. Simone and Andre looked confident in that courtroom. They had polished smiles, coordinated papers, and a plan. What they did not have was truth. And in the end, truth did not need to raise its voice. If this story hits you hard, and you want more original relationship betrayal stories, cheating wife revenge stories, and dramatic courtroom endings where lies finally collapse, make sure you like, share, and subscribe right now. These stories are for people who know that silence is not weakness, and proof changes everything. Drop this in the comments if you made it to the end. Truth does not need to shout. What stayed with me was not the judge stopping Andre, or Simone grabbing my sleeve in the hallway, or even that ridiculous Homes in Canada line. It was a smaller trail. The spoon against the teacup, the forged signature lifted from a church letter, the brass fish keys still warm in my hand on Drummond Island. Big betrayals usually arrive disguised as paperwork, convenience, or just one signature. The lesson is not to become hard. It is to become exact. Grief can be survived. Confusion is what costs people the most. The end.